My husband and mother-in-law kicked me out of the house, but 1 month later, when they found out that I was being taken care of by my wealthy uncle and had inherited $450,000 from him, my husband and mother-in-law immediately came begging for me to return home. When I refused, they threatened to divorce me and sue me for marital property. At that moment, I showed them something that left them completely speechless, and when the lawyer arrived, their faces turned deathly pale with hysteria. Before the story begins, please write in the comments section where you are watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so Stories with Meaning can continue to grow and bring you even more powerful stories. That night, the rain poured relentlessly, as if the sky itself was unloading all of its sorrow onto the earth. Inside a modest house that should have felt warm and safe, Nora lay trembling on a thin rug in the living room. Her body felt shattered, and her head throbbed as if it were being struck repeatedly with a hammer. A high fever had plagued her for 2 days, leaving her dizzy, weak, and barely conscious. She tried to close her eyes, hoping to escape the pain even for a moment, but a shrill voice from the kitchen forced her eyes open again. It was Mrs. Miller, her mother-in-law. The middle-aged woman stormed toward her with heavy footsteps, her face red with fury. In her hand was a dirty plate. Without hesitation, she hurled the plastic plate at Nora. It bounced across the floor, landing right in front of Nora's pale face. The sharp clatter echoed through the room, competing with the roar of rain outside. Mrs. Miller unleashed a barrage of cruel insults, completely ignoring Nora's severe illness. She screamed about the dirty dishes piled in the sink and the unswept floor, accusing Nora of being a lazy woman who did nothing but sleep and waste food. With great difficulty, Nora tried to sit up, supporting her trembling body with weak arms. In a hoarse, barely audible voice, she explained that she had finished doing the laundry this morning, but her fever had suddenly worsened in the afternoon. She begged for just a little understanding, just a short rest before continuing the chores. Instead of calming things down, her explanation only fueled Mrs. Miller's rage. She mocked Nora relentlessly, calling her a useless wife and a burden. She sneered that she was an orphan who didn't know how lucky she was to be taken in. Each word cut into Nora's already shattered heart like a blade. Nora lowered her head, biting back tears. She knew crying would only make things worse. Suddenly, the front door slammed open. Ryan, her husband, walked in, exhausted from work. For a brief second, Nora felt a flicker of hope. She looked at him with pleading eyes, silently begging him to notice her condition, to defend her, or at least stop his mother. That hope shattered within seconds. Ryan took one look at his furious mother and his wife lying on the floor and immediately sided with his mother. He threw his work bag onto the couch and stared at Nora with pure disgust, as if she were filth contaminating his home. He yelled at her, demanding to know why his mother had to be angry when he came home tired from work. He complained that he worked all day and expected peace, not drama caused by a lazy wife. He didn't even bother checking Nora's forehead. Her life meant nothing to him. When Nora weakly reached for his hand, trying to ask for medicine or even a glass of warm water, Ryan slapped her hand away roughly, causing her to stumble sideways. Coldly, he said he was sick of her pitiful face. He accused her of bringing nothing of value into his life and blamed her for their financial struggles. Mrs. Miller added fuel to the fire, comparing Ryan to neighbors whose daughters-in-law were wealthy and successful. She mocked him for being stuck with a sickly wife. That was the final blow. Ryan snapped. He grabbed Nora's arm with crushing force and yanked her to her feet. Nora screamed in pain as tears streamed down her face, begging him to stop and asking what she had done to deserve such treatment. But Ryan had lost all control. He dragged her toward the front door while Mrs. Miller rushed to the bedroom, grabbed a large bag filled with Nora's old clothes, and threw it outside. Ryan flung the door open. Cold wind and rain blasted inside. With one final shove, he threw Nora out into the muddy yard. Her body hit the soaked ground hard, her clothes instantly caked with dirt and rain. The cold water clashed painfully against her burning, fevered body, sending violent shivers through her bones. Standing in the doorway, Ryan shouted that he never wanted to see her unless she came back with money. Mrs. Miller stood behind him, smiling in satisfaction, tossing Nora's bag into a puddle and sneering that the streets suited her better than their respectable home. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Nora was left alone in the dark, penniless, soaked, abandoned, her body broken and her heart completely destroyed. An orphan with no one to turn to, discarded by the man who had sworn to protect her. Her vision blurred. Exhausted, freezing, and hopeless, she thought death might be kinder than this life of humiliation. Then, bright headlights pierced the darkness. A sleek black luxury sedan rolled to a stop in front of her. The engine shut off. The rear door opened. A well-dressed, middle-aged man stepped out, his expensive shoes splashing through puddles as he rushed toward her. He knelt beside her, gently lifting her face. He called her name with a trembling voice. Before she lost consciousness, she heard him promise, filled with regret and fury, that no one would ever hurt her again. Darkness took her. When Nora opened her eyes again, the scent of medicine mixed with a luxurious room fragrance filled her senses. Soft lighting greeted her. She lay on an incredibly comfortable bed, wrapped in warm blankets. This wasn't a regular hospital room. It was a VIP medical suite. Panic surged through her as she wondered who could possibly pay for this. Before she could move, the bathroom door slowly opened. The middle-aged man she had vaguely seen before losing consciousness the night before stepped out of the bathroom, looking noticeably refreshed. Although traces of worry still lingered in his eyes, his face broke into a wide smile the moment he saw that Nora was awake. He walked closer and sat down on the chair beside her bed, gently taking her hand in his. It was a warm, fatherly touch, one Nora had not felt in many years, ever since her father passed away. The man introduced himself as Uncle Benjamin. The name instantly stirred long-buried memories in Nora's mind. Uncle Benjamin was her late father's younger brother. When Nora was little, he used to carry her on his shoulders and spoil her endlessly. But after both of Nora's parents died in a tragic accident more than a decade ago, Uncle Benjamin had disappeared. The last thing Nora had heard was that he had gone overseas because of crushing debt and then vanished without a trace. Uncle Benjamin explained everything in a heavy, regret-filled voice. He apologized repeatedly for leaving Nora alone all these years. He admitted that back then he had left the country completely bankrupt and hopeless. Ashamed of his failure, he had cut off all contact with his family. But fate had other plans. Through relentless hard work in the real estate industry abroad, he slowly rebuilt his life, then surpassed all expectations. He became one of the most successful property developers in the region. When he returned to the country a month ago, determined to find Nora and make up for his past mistakes, he was devastated to learn that she was married and suffering. Uncle Benjamin revealed that he had hired a private investigation firm to track Nora down. The investigator's report filled him with uncontrollable rage. He discovered that Nora had married into what could only be described as a living hell, a cruel husband and a vicious mother-in-law. That rainy night, Uncle Benjamin had actually been on his way to Ryan's house, intending to bring Nora away properly and safely. Instead, fate led him to find his only niece, the daughter of the brother he respected most, lying on the roadside like discarded trash. Hearing this, Nora's tears spilled uncontrollably. For years, she had believed she was completely alone in this world, unwanted by anyone. Knowing that her own blood still cared for her and had been searching for her shattered her emotional defenses. She cried harder than she had ever cried before, pouring out every ounce of pain, humiliation, and suffering she had endured throughout her 2-year marriage to hell itself. She told him how she had been treated like a servant, how her salary had always been taken by Ryan before he eventually forbade her from working altogether, and how she had never once been treated like a human being. Uncle Benjamin listened in silence. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. Rage boiled violently inside his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm, not wanting to frighten her niece. He gently stroked Nora's head, which was wrapped in a simple hospital shawl, and swore on her late father's name that he would restore the happiness and smile that had been stolen from her. Soon after, a doctor entered the room accompanied by 2 nurses. The doctor showed clear respect toward Uncle Benjamin as he presented Nora's medical reports. As the doctor explained Nora's condition in detail, Uncle Benjamin's face darkened with every sentence. The high fever, the doctor said, was caused by an infection worsened by severe physical and psychological stress. But the most shocking revelation was that Nora was suffering from chronic malnutrition. Her nutritional levels were comparable to someone who had not eaten properly for months. There were also signs of acute stomach damage, likely caused by consuming unhygienic or leftover food over a prolonged period. Nora lowered her head in shame. She remembered how Mrs. Miller had forbidden her from eating freshly cooked meals, forcing her to eat day-old rice or nearly spoiled food under the excuse of saving money, while Ryan and his mother enjoyed hot, freshly prepared dishes every day. The medical facts hit Uncle Benjamin like a sledgehammer. This was no longer a domestic issue. This was abuse. Standing abruptly, Uncle Benjamin stared at the doctor and ordered that Nora receive the best possible treatment without any concern for cost. He wanted her to recover completely, physically and mentally. The doctor nodded and immediately arranged advanced nutritional therapy and premium medical care. After the medical staff left, silence filled the room. Uncle Benjamin sat back down, his expression now firm and resolute. Holding Nora by the shoulders, he looked straight into her tear-stained eyes. From this day forward, he declared, Nora would no longer be a weak woman anyone could trample on. She was a member of the Benjamin family, a family with the power and resources to make those who humiliated her regret their actions. He revealed his plan. He did not want Nora to return to Ryan when broken and weak. He wanted her healed, rebuilt, and reborn. He would transfer part of his assets to her, not to secure her future, but to teach a lesson to those who judge human worth by money alone. I will make Ryan and Mrs. Miller kneel in regret, Uncle Benjamin vowed, not through violence, but by forcing them to realize the priceless diamond they threw into the gutter. Nora was stunned. Fear flickered briefly, but warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt protected. She felt safe. Uncle Benjamin wiped her tears and told her to rest. As Nora lay back against the soft pillows, staring at the ceiling of the luxurious room, the cruel faces of Ryan and Mrs. Miller slowly faded, replaced by the calm, reassuring presence of her uncle. In her heart, Nora made a promise to herself. She would heal, she would rise, and she would never allow anyone to hurt her again. Outside the hospital window, the rain had stopped. The sky began to clear, as if signaling that the storm in Nora's life was finally coming to an end. 1 month later, 1 month had passed since that dark night that changed Nora's life forever. In Nora's Uncle Benjamin's luxurious residence in an elite district of the capital, Nora stood before a large mirror, facing a completely new reflection of herself. The frail, dull, exhausted woman she once knew was gone. The woman standing there now radiated health and elegance. Her once sunken face had filled out, her cheeks glowing with natural color, a clear sign of proper nutrition and premium care. She gently touched her smooth, well-maintained skin, still unfamiliar with the transformation. She wore a flowing silk dress of the finest quality, tailored modestly yet gracefully to her figure. A long shawl was draped neatly around her shoulders, framing her luminous face. No more faded clothes, no more frayed shawls. Uncle Benjamin had kept his word. He hired nutritionists, dermatologists, and even a personal stylist to restore the dignity that poverty and abuse had stripped away from her. But the greatest transformation was not physical. It was in her eyes. The fearful, hesitant gaze had been replaced by calm confidence and quiet strength. Every evening, Uncle Benjamin personally mentored her in asset management and leadership mindset, teaching her how to speak firmly, carry herself with authority, and understand her own worth. Nora absorbed everything like dry soil drinking rain. That morning was special. Uncle Benjamin summoned Nora to his main office. On the large mahogany desk lay several important documents stamped by a notary. Smiling proudly, he explained that he had officially transferred part of his wealth into Nora's name. "This is not charity," he said gently. "It is your right as my only blood heir." Nora held her breath when she saw the number on the bank document. An initial balance of $450,000 had been deposited into her personal account. Her hands trembled. In addition to the cash, she was granted ownership of a prestigious gold jewelry boutique in the city center and majority shares in a 4-star hotel. Uncle Benjamin made it clear Nora had full authority over these assets, not to become arrogant, but to ensure she would never again depend on anyone financially. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, life in Ryan and Mrs. Miller's house had fallen into complete chaos. The once clean home was now a disaster. Dirty dishes piled high in the sink, spreading a foul smell throughout the house. The floors were sticky and dusty. Laundry overflowed in the bathroom, untouched. Ryan and Mrs. Miller sat at the dining table with sour expressions, staring at cold, bloated instant noodles. Since Nora was thrown out, their expenses had spiraled. Now that Nora was gone, they had grown accustomed to buying ready-made meals from outside, food that was far more expensive than home-cooked dishes. Ryan's modest salary was completely drained within the first 2 weeks, and soon they were forced to borrow money from a nearby neighborhood grocery just to afford daily meals. Mrs. Miller complained endlessly. Her mouth never stopped cursing their situation, yet somehow she still blamed Nora for everything. She whined about her aching back from having to sweep the yard herself. She complained that her clothes smelled musty because the washing machine was broken and she was too lazy to wash by hand. She shouted at Ryan, demanding to know why he couldn't find a replacement housekeeper. Ryan, his head pounding as he worried about overdue electricity bills and unpaid motorcycle installments, could only stay silent and swallow his anger. For the first time, he began to feel how heavy the burden of household work truly was, the same work Nora had done quietly, day after day, without complaint. Yet his male ego and his mother's pride kept them from admitting one simple truth. They needed Nora. The tension in the house reached its peak that afternoon when a guest arrived. It was Mrs. Taylor, a fellow member of Mrs. Miller's social club, well known for being up to date on gossip and trending news. Normally, Mrs. Miller loved welcoming her guests to show off, but this time she felt embarrassed by the messy state of her house. Mrs. Taylor didn't seem to care about the dirty dishes scattered across the table. Her face was glowing with excitement. Without any small talk, she thrust her smartphone in front of Mrs. Miller's face. A local news video was playing. On the screen was the grand opening of a luxury gold jewelry boutique, red ribbons being cut, balloons released into the air, and cameras flashing as the owner delivered a speech. The woman on screen was stunning, elegantly dressed, her outfit clearly expensive, a long shawl draped gracefully over her shoulders. Standing beside her was a well-known real estate tycoon whose face frequently appeared on business magazines. With a sharp, probing tone, Mrs. Taylor asked, "Isn't that Nora, your former daughter-in-law, the one you said was lazy and poor?" Mrs. Miller narrowed her eyes and leaned closer to the screen. Her heart seemed to stop. She recognized the small beauty mark near her chin. She recognized that subtle smile. Despite the dramatic transformation, there was no mistake. The confident woman smiling under the flashing cameras was Nora. The same Nora she had thrown a plate at a month ago. The same Nora she had called trash. Mrs. Miller stood frozen, her mouth hanging open, unable to make a sound. Ryan, curious and alarmed, snatched the phone from her hands. His eyes widened as he read the headline at the bottom of the screen. "The sole heir of the Benjamin family returns, the visionary woman behind the new luxury jewelry boutique." Ryan skimmed the article rapidly, his breathing turning erratic. It stated that Nora was the niece of Uncle Benjamin, a powerful entrepreneur who had recently returned from abroad and now controlled assets worth millions. The phone slipped from Ryan's hands and hit the table with a dull thud, breaking the suffocating silence. They sat there, stunned, hit harder by the truth than any physical slap. The news of Nora's success struck Ryan's house like a lightning bolt in broad daylight. After Mrs. Taylor left with a satisfied smile, pleased to have spread the hottest gossip, Ryan and Mrs. Miller immediately began digging for information online. They searched everything about Uncle Benjamin and his businesses. The more they learned, the paler their faces became. Yet at the same time, their eyes began to gleam with a disgusting spark of greed. They discovered that Uncle Benjamin's wealth was no rumor. Properties, land, and investments were scattered everywhere, and Nora was his only family. Ryan collapsed onto the worn-out sofa, clutching his head. He felt stupid, incredibly stupid. He had been sleeping next to a gold mine and threw it away just to satisfy his mother's obsession with having a wealthy daughter-in-law. The irony burned. He imagined the $450,000 inheritance. If he were still with Nora, he could have paid off all his debts, bought his dream sports car, and turned this house into a palace. Regret crept into his heart, but it was not the regret of a man who had hurt his wife. It was the regret of a merchant who had thrown away a priceless asset. Mrs. Miller, after her initial shock, suddenly looked energized. Her cunning mind began spinning rapidly. She slapped Ryan's shoulder and ordered him to lift his head. With absolute confidence, she declared that it was not too late. Legally, she reminded him, they were still married. No divorce papers had been filed. No official declaration had been made in court. That meant Nora was still Ryan's lawful wife. And in Mrs. Miller's logic, a wife's property belonged to her husband. She began indoctrinating Ryan, insisting that Nora still loved him, claiming she was merely upset and needed persuasion. She urged him to forget his pride for now, for the sake of a greater goal. They had to bring Nora back, not to apologize, but to reclaim control. Mrs. Miller imagined a future where she would never wash dishes again, receiving tens of thousands of dollars in monthly allowance, and even hosting a lavish social gathering the next week. Ryan, weak-willed and easily manipulated, quickly agreed. His earlier despair transformed into aggressive ambition. He felt entitled to the money, convincing himself that supporting Nora for 2 years entitled him to compensation. He grabbed his phone and searched for Nora's number, the same contact he hadn't called once in the past month. The last message he sent her had been filled with insults. Now he practiced sweet words in front of the mirror, adjusting his facial expression and tone to sound sorrowful, loving, and remorseful. He planned to pretend his mother was gravely ill from missing Nora and that he himself was suffering deeply from losing his soulmate. He was confident that the old, naive, obedient Nora would melt at a few crocodile tears. With trembling fingers full of hope, he pressed the call button. On the other end, in the lush backyard of a luxurious estate, Nora sat peacefully enjoying afternoon tea while reading a book on business management. Her phone vibrated on the marble table. She glanced at the screen. Ryan. Her heart fluttered briefly, a reflex born from past trauma, but it lasted only a second. She took a deep breath, remembered who she was now, remembered Uncle Benjamin's support, and remembered the cruelty of the man calling her. She answered the call, but said nothing. She let Ryan speak first. His voice came through deliberately trembling and dramatic. He called her darling and my love, terms she hadn't heard in years. He spoke of how empty the house felt without her, how deeply he regretted that night, how Mrs. Miller was now ill from crying and calling Nora's name. He begged her to come home, promising to change and start a new, happy life together. Nora felt nothing, only nausea. She knew them too well. If not for the inheritance, Ryan would never have called her, unless begged her to come home. The falseness in his voice was suffocating. Nora smiled faintly, a cold smile. Without saying a single word, without allowing Ryan to finish his performance, she ended the call. Her thumb pressed firmly, block contact. She did the same to Mrs. Miller's number and the house phone. She closed the door on the poison of her past. Nora set her phone down, lifted her teacup, and took a slow sip. The tea tasted better than ever. She felt victorious. On the other end, Ryan stared at his phone in disbelief. The call had ended. When he tried again, only a long, busy tone answered. He sent a message, only to see a single gray checkmark. Blocked. Ryan slammed the phone onto the sofa, his face burning with rage and humiliation. His plan had failed at the She was wearing a soft, flowing, long dress that draped elegantly over her figure, paired with a shawl fastened by a genuine pearl brooch. The combination radiated quiet authority, an aura so refined that the restaurant staff treated her with exceptional respect. However, the peace did not last long. From the direction of the main entrance, a commotion suddenly shattered the calm atmosphere of the restaurant. The shrill screams of an elderly woman echoed loudly, causing several diners to turn their heads with furrowed brows. Nora, who had been fully focused on reviewing documents, slowly lifted her face. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized the voice. It was the voice that had haunted her nightmares for the past 2 years, Mrs. Miller. Nora looked toward the entrance, and there they were. Ryan and Mrs. Miller were arguing loudly with the receptionist, who was trying to block them from entering due to their appearance, which clearly violated the restaurant's strict dress code. They had arrived with a carefully calculated, deceitful strategy. They deliberately wore the most worn-out clothes they owned. Ryan was dressed in a stretched-out t-shirt with a sagging collar and faded jeans. Mrs. Miller wore an old house dress covered by a dull, threadbare cardigan and cheap flip-flops with nearly worn-through soles. Their faces were deliberately crafted to look pitiful, as if they were helpless victims of injustice. The moment Mrs. Miller's eyes locked onto Nora sitting by the window, she shoved the receptionist aside roughly and rushed toward Nora's table, screaming hysterically, launching the drama she had meticulously rehearsed. Mrs. Miller threw herself on the floor right beside Nora's table. She knelt down, wailing loudly, her cries exaggerated and piercing, deliberately drawing the attention of everyone in the restaurant. She screamed accusations, branding Nora as a heartless, unfilial wife who had run away from home after stealing her husband's wealth. Mrs. Miller sobbed dramatically, claiming that Ryan was gravely ill and starving at home, while Nora indulged herself in luxury dining at a high-end restaurant. Her acting was disturbingly convincing. Tears streamed down her wrinkled face, and her hoarse cries stirred sympathy among several patrons who had no idea what the truth was. Whispering began, and judgmental stares were directed at Nora. The contrast was striking. A seemingly suffering elderly woman kneeling at the feet of a young woman who looked wealthy, composed, and elegant. Ryan followed, standing beside the table with a face twisted as if holding back tears and rage. He pointed a trembling finger at Nora and yelled obscenities at her in public. He yelled that he never expected Nora to abandon her duties as a wife just to chase a hedonistic lifestyle. He accused Nora of stealing his savings to buy the jewelry and expensive clothes she was wearing. Ryan yelled loudly, demanding that Nora return home, repent, and give back the money she had allegedly run away with. The restaurant descended into chaos. The piano music stopped abruptly. Every eye in the room was now fixed on the unfolding family drama. Several guests even pulled out their phones, eager to record what they believed to be a scandal involving the rich, content worth going viral. Nora felt the weight of countless judgmental gazes pressing down on her. For a brief moment, shame and fear crept into her chest. Old trauma resurfaced, memories of always being blamed, always being the one at fault. But then she remembered Uncle Benjamin's words. She was no longer the Nora she used to be. She was no longer a victim. Nora inhaled deeply, straightened her back, and looked at Ryan and Mrs. Miller with cold, expressionless eyes. She did not rise from her chair. She did not respond to their shouting. Her silence only enraged Ryan further as he felt ignored and humiliated. He reached out, attempting to grab Nora's arm, intending to forcibly pull her up. But before his filthy hand could touch the fabric of Nora's dress, she raised her hand calmly, giving a firm, unmistakable stop signal. With composed movements, Nora picked up her smartphone from the table. She did not need to shout to defend herself. She played an audio recording she had kept as evidence. Nora connected her phone to a small Bluetooth speaker she always carried in her bag and turned the volume to maximum. The recording echoed clearly through the tense silence of the restaurant. It was a recording from 1 month earlier, the night she had been thrown out. Ryan's furious voice rang out unmistakably. "A sick woman like you is nothing but a burden. You eat, you sleep, you leech off me. Get out. Don't come back unless you bring money." It was followed by Mrs. Miller's venomous curses. "You parasite, go die on the streets." The sound of heavy rain and thunder crackling in the background made the recording even more chilling and brutal. The faces of the restaurant patrons, who moments earlier had looked at Nora with contempt, shifted instantly into shock. They heard for themselves the cruelty spoken by the very people now pretending to be victims. Ryan and Mrs. Miller's faces drained of all color. They never imagined Nora possessed evidence this powerful. The narrative of the unfilial wife shattered instantly. Whispers reversed direction. Disgusted stares replaced sympathy. The recording silenced Mrs. Miller's fake sobbing completely. She froze, confused, exposed, and utterly defeated in public. Nora stopped the recording and calmly turned her gaze toward the restaurant manager, who had rushed over with 2 tall, broad-shouldered security guards. In a calm yet authoritative voice, Nora addressed the manager. She apologized for the disturbance caused by these trespassers who entered without permission. She stated clearly that she did not know them. To her, the husband and mother-in-law who had thrown her out into the rain when she was critically ill were already dead. She requested that security remove the individuals disrupting her lunch. Nora's dignificant demeanor and the undeniable evidence immediately convinced the manager. He gestured to the security guards to escort Ryan and Mrs. Miller out. Ryan exploded with humiliation. He resisted violently, attempting to charge toward Nora, trying to strike her as his pride shattered. But the guards acted swiftly, restraining both his arms and twisting them behind his back. Ryan struggled and screamed threats, vowing to destroy Nora. Mrs. Miller was dragged along as well, after attempting to claw at the guards. The scene was both pitiful and deeply satisfying for Nora. The 2 people who once towered over her life like monsters were now nothing more than helpless troublemakers restrained by law and order. Before Ryan was dragged completely out the door, Nora slowly stood up. She took a few steps closer, close enough for Ryan to hear her, far enough to remain safe. She met his bloodshot eyes and spoke in a low, piercing tone. "Never dream of touching me again. Your hands are too filthy to touch my clothes. And one more thing, stop acting. You don't look pitiful. You look disgusting." The words struck Ryan like a brutal slap to the face. Ryan and Mrs. Miller were finally thrown out on the scorching sidewalk in front of the luxury restaurant, witnessed by passers-by. The glass doors closed behind them, sealing off their bleak world from Nora's radiant one. Inside, Nora sat back down. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the powerful release of adrenaline. She finished her orange juice in one long drink, savoring her first small victory. She knew this was only the beginning. Ryan and his mother were not the kind of people who stopped because of shame. They would return, with even darker intentions. But this time, Nora was ready. She would not run. She would wait and destroy them completely. The sun began to dip westward, casting long shadows over the towering gates of a grand mansion in an elite neighborhood. In front of the massive wrought iron gates, Ryan and Mrs. Miller stood, panting heavily. After being humiliated at the restaurant, their anger and desperation hardened into recklessness. They had followed Nora's car from a distance using an online taxi, burning through the last of Ryan's money until they arrived at the palace where Nora now lived with Uncle Benjamin. The sheer luxury of the estate made their courage waver briefly. But the image of 450,000 USD reignited their greed. Ryan slammed the intercom button repeatedly, shouting Nora's name, ignoring the CCTV cameras recording every move. Inside the security post, a muscular guard watched the monitors with suspicion, ready to expel the unhinged intruders. Meanwhile, in the mansion's main living room, Nora and Uncle Benjamin were watching the live feed. They believed the terror they had inflicted had worked. With arrogant strides, as if they already owned the place, Ryan and Mrs. Miller walked across the vast courtyard adorned with manicured flower gardens and a marble fountain. Mrs. Miller's eyes sparkled wildly as she took in the luxury surrounding her. She stared at the lineup of luxury cars inside the open garage, the towering pillars of the mansion, and imagined herself as the lady of this house. Ryan walked with his chest puffed out, straightening his wrinkled t-shirt, trying to look authoritative despite how painfully out of place he looked. In his mind, he was rehearsing what he believed to be his most lethal threats. He planned to play the husband card. He would weaponize marriage law to pressure Nora. He was convinced that a woman as kind and gentle as Nora would never have the heart to see her husband suffer, or at the very least would be afraid of court proceedings. Ryan was blind to one crucial fact. The woman he was about to face was no longer the Nora he once knew. They arrived at the massive 3-meter-tall carved teak wood front door. It was opened by a neatly uniformed house assistant. Ryan and Mrs. Miller stepped inside without removing their dirty footwear, leaving dusty footprints across the gleaming granite floor. The assistant looked uncomfortable but did not dare say a word. Inside the vast, opulent living room, Nora was already seated, waiting alone on a single chair that resembled a throne. Meanwhile, Uncle Benjamin stood near the window with his back to them, radiating a powerful, intimidating presence. Without being invited to sit, Ryan and Mrs. Miller threw themselves onto the long plush sofa. Mrs. Miller even placed her feet on the marble coffee table, an outrageously disrespectful act. Ryan wasted no time. In a loud, aggressive tone, he stared straight at Nora and said, "It's good you finally came to your senses and let us in. Just so you know, Nora, my mother and I have consulted someone who understands the law. You can't enjoy all this wealth by yourself." Ryan launched into his favorite threat. He declared that legally they were still husband and wife under state law. Therefore, any assets, money, or inheritance received by either party during the marriage automatically became joint marital property. Ryan demanded his share. He demanded half of the USD $450,000. If Nora refused, he threatened to take the matter to court and ruin her reputation for the rest of her life. He even threatened to sue Uncle Benjamin for allegedly harboring another man's wife without the husband's consent. Mrs. Miller chimed in sharply. She added layers of melodrama, claiming Nora owed them a debt of gratitude for being allowed to live in their house for 2 years. Mrs. Miller insisted the money was compensation for her emotional suffering after being abandoned by her daughter-in-law. Their logic was completely twisted by greed. They spoke as though they were the victims, when in reality, they were the ones who had thrown Nora out while she was critically ill. Nora listened to every word in silence, her face flat and unreadable. She let them pour out every filthy thought in their minds. Inside, she felt a quiet sadness. She had once loved this man. She had once deeply respected this woman. Now all she saw were two human beings enslaved by money. Uncle Benjamin, who had remained silent, finally turned around. His piercing gaze landed on Ryan, making him pause for a split second under the weight of the tycoon's authority. But Ryan's greed outweighed his fear. Nora raised her hand gently, signaling her uncle to stay calm. She looked Ryan straight in the eyes and spoke in a voice that was calm but ice cold. "So you came here only for money?" she asked. "Not to apologize, not to fix anything, just money." Ryan laughed dismissively. "Don't be naive, Nora. Love can't be eaten. Apologies don't pay debts. Of course we want the money. It's my right as your husband. If you want to avoid lawsuits and public humiliation, transfer USD $225,000 to my account right now." After that, he said arrogantly, she was free to choose, remain his wife or get divorced. That statement was the final confirmation Nora needed. All doubt vanished from her heart. She smiled, a mysterious smile that made the hair on Ryan's neck stand up for no apparent reason. Nora arose from her chair and walked slowly toward a desk in the corner of the room where a thick folder had been prepared in advance. "Very well, Ryan," her tone sounded like a judge delivering a verdict. "You want to talk about the law, about marital rights, then let's speak the real language of the law. I'm glad you walked into the lion's den voluntarily." She pressed a button on the landline phone on the desk. "Mr. Harrison, please come in. Our uninvited guests are ready to hear your explanation." The door to the adjacent study opened. A middle-aged man stepped out, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, carrying a thick stack of documents. His face was stern, devoid of any smile, and his eyes radiated lethal intelligence. This was Mr. Harrison, the family's top attorney, notorious for never losing an asset dispute. At the sight of the lawyer, the triumphant smiles on Ryan and Mrs. Miller slowly faded, replaced by a creeping sense of unease. They had just stepped into a trap that would destroy their lives forever. They just didn't realize it yet. Mr. Harrison's presence altered the very atmosphere of the room. With neatly combed graying hair and an unshakable aura of authority, he walked calmly across the granite floor. The rhythmic sound of his shoes echoed ominously through the spacious room. He did not sit. Instead, he stood beside Nora's chair and placed the thick stack of documents onto the marble table with deliberate precision, like laying down a weapon. Ryan and Mrs. Miller subtly adjusted their posture. Their instincts sensed danger, but greed clouded their judgment. In their narrow minds, the lawyer's presence only confirmed victory. They believed Nora had panicked over the joint property threat and summoned a lawyer to arrange the division of assets. A sly smile returned to Mrs. Miller's lips. She nudged Ryan's arm, whispering that their strategy had succeeded and Nora had clearly surrendered. Mrs. Miller imagined checks being signed and bank transfers being arranged. With excessive confidence, she cleared her throat loudly, attempting to seize control of the conversation before the lawyer could speak. She lifted her chin arrogantly and looked down at Nora as though she was still the poor daughter-in-law she used to bark orders at in her grimy kitchen. In a deliberately authoritative but shrill voice, Mrs. Miller declared that calling a lawyer was the right decision so everything could be settled clearly and officially. She generously announced that she was willing to forgive Nora for running away from home as long as the asset division was finalized today. Without any shame, she even dictated her demands, insisting Ryan's share be transferred directly into her personal account, claiming Ryan was irresponsible with money. In truth, she wanted total control. Ryan was no less audacious. He reached into his faded jeans and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, folded carelessly and covered in uneven handwriting. It was a hastily written agreement he had scribbled the night before. With full confidence, he slapped the wrinkled paper onto the polished marble table right beside Mr. Harrison's pristine legal documents. The contrast was absurd, trash beside diamonds, yet Ryan lacked the awareness to feel embarrassed. He explained the contents aggressively, stating it was a peace agreement. The main point was that Nora must surrender 50% of all assets she had received from Uncle Benjamin, plus one luxury vehicle as transportation compensation. He even added a ridiculous clause demanding Nora pay the renovation of his mother's house and provide Mrs. Miller with a monthly allowance as proof of filial duty. Ryan genuinely believed these demands were reasonable. In his twisted logic, a wife belonged to her husband, therefore her wealth belonged to him. He spoke passionately as though issuing a royal decree. Nora listened without interrupting. Her face was calm, like the surface of a lake, untouched by wind. Inside, she felt a quiet sadness. She had once loved this Nan. She had once deeply respected this woman. Now all she saw were two human beings enslaved by money. Uncle Benjamin, who had remained silent, finally turned around. His piercing gaze landed on Ryan, making him pause for a split second under the weight of the tycoon's authority. But Ryan's greed outweighed his fear. Nora raised her hand gently, signaling her uncle to stay calm. She looked Ryan straight in the eyes and spoke in a voice that was calm but ice cold. "So you came here only for money?" she asked. "Not to apologize, not to fix anything, just money." Ryan laughed dismissively. "Don't be naive, Nora. Love can't be—" Was their dignity really worth nothing more than the numbers scribbled on that crumpled piece of paper? The question struck a nerve. Ryan bristled immediately. With a cold, cutting tone, he snapped back that this was not about dignity, it was about his rights. He reiterated his threat. If Nora refused to sign the wrinkled document right now, he would take the matter to court and make her regret it. Ryan felt confident, convinced he held the upper hand. He believed Nora would be terrified of a public divorce scandal, one that could tarnish the pristine image of her newly established business. But Nora's reaction was completely unexpected. She didn't cry, she didn't beg, she didn't look afraid. Instead, she laughed. It was a soft, almost musical laugh, yet it sent a chill down Ryan's spine. There was something razor-sharp in it, a quiet mockery that felt far more terrifying than anger. Nora slowly shook her head, then reached for a thick navy blue folder held by Mr. Saunders, the lawyer seated beside her. Her slender fingers tapped rhythmically against the cover, each tap echoing like a countdown that made Ryan's heart pound uneasily. "Before discussing the division of marital assets," Nora said calmly, "it would be wise for everyone to understand their actual position. Dreams were beautiful," she remarked, "but waking up from a nightmare was not optional." She slid the blue folder across the polished table. The movement was slow, deliberate, yet the folder glided smoothly and stopped directly in front of Ryan's chest. "Go ahead," Nora said. "What's inside is the answer to all the ridiculous demands you just read aloud." Ryan stared at the folder, suddenly hesitant. A strange sense of dread crept over him. Cold sweat began to bead along his temples. Growing impatient, Mrs. Miller nudged him sharply and urged him to open it already. She was certain it contained a list of assets waiting to be divided. With slightly trembling hands, Ryan opened the folder. The scent of freshly printed paper rose into the air, carrying with it the unmistakable smell of destruction. He flipped to the first page roughly, expecting to see numbers, bank balances, property deeds, something he could claim. Instead, his world collapsed. At the top of the page was an official letterhead bearing a green emblem of the scales of justice. Beneath it, bold capital letters read, "Family Court." Below that, in unmistakably clear language, were the words divorce decree and certified court decision, stating that the marriage between Ryan and Nora had been legally dissolved through a wife-initiated divorce granted by default due to the defendant's absence. Ryan's eyes widened as if they might leap from their sockets. His breath caught painfully in his throat. He reread the date again and again, desperately searching for an error, something to deny what he was seeing. There was none. The filing date was exactly 1 day after the night Nora had been thrown out of the house. That meant while Ryan and his mother were celebrating Nora's departure and wasting what little household money remained, Nora, hospitalized and gravely ill, had already acted decisively through Uncle Benjamin's attorney, legally severing the marriage Ryan himself had destroyed. The process was swift and silent because Ryan never appeared for the hearings. The court notices had been sent to his old registered address, a rented place he had long abandoned, having never bothered to update his ID or residency records after moving in with his mother. Mr. Saunders began to speak. His voice fell like a judge's gavel delivering a death sentence. He explained in precise legal detail that according to the documents, Nora had ceased to be Ryan's wife under both civil and religious law as of last week's ruling. Then came the final blow. Mr. Saunders pointed to another date, the date of inheritance transfer from Uncle Benjamin. The notarized deed showed that assets worth USD $450,000 had been legally transferred to Nora 3 days after the divorce decree was finalized. The logic was simple and absolutely fatal. Nora received the inheritance as a legally single woman. Therefore, the money was her personal property, not marital property. It was not subject to division. Ryan had zero claim, not even 0.01% to that money. Every argument Ryan had made about a husband's right to his wife's assets crumbled instantly into dust. The marital property trap he had so proudly relied on turned out to be the grave he had dug for himself. Seeing her son's face drain of color, Mrs. Miller snatched the documents from his hands. She read slowly, stumbling over the words with her failing eyesight, yet she grasped the meaning almost immediately. She exploded. Screaming hysterically, she threw the papers to the floor, shouting that it was impossible. She accused Nora of forging documents, bribing the court, and committing fraud. She pounded her wrinkled fists on the marble table, insisting that Ryan was still Nora's husband and therefore entitled to financial support. She began to quote religious doctrine, selectively, violently, twisting it to suit her agenda. She yelled that a husband was a leader to be obeyed, and that a wife who divorced her husband would burn in hell. She tried to attack Nora psychologically, hoping guilt and fear would break her. But Nora merely looked at her with a flat, terrifying calm. In an even voice, she replied that heaven does not lie beneath the feet of an abusive husband, and that no faith ever taught a man to abandon his wife in the street while she was gravely ill. She added quietly that the marriage had effectively ended the moment Ryan threw her out and said, "Don't ever come back." The court, Nora concluded, only made official what you destroyed that night. Ryan collapsed onto the sofa, his body going limp as if his bones had been ripped out. The room spun. 5 minutes earlier, he had been imagining sports cars, luxury renovations, and a life of effortless wealth. Now it was all gone. All that remained was the bitter truth. He was a penniless divorcee drowning in debt. He looked at Nora, desperately searching for a trace of the woman who once loved him, some fragment of mercy. There was none. Her eyes were dry, barren, empty. The Nora who loved him was dead, killed by Ryan's own hands. But Mr. Saunders wasn't finished. He pulled out another set of documents. "The marital status is settled," he said calmly, "but the matter of debt is not. Ryan jerked his head up in shock. Debt? What debt? He insisted he had never borrowed anything from Nora. In fact, he claimed she owed him for living expenses all these years. Mr. Saunders smiled faintly. It was the smile of a predator enjoying the final moments of the hunt. He explained that during the marriage, Nora had possessed a premarital asset, a savings account left to her by her late father. Ryan kept the bank book and ATM card, claiming it was safer that way. Trusting him completely, Nora handed everything over. A forensic financial investigation revealed the truth. The account, meant to secure Nora's future, had been actively drained over the past 2 years through cash withdrawals and transfers. Ryan began to shake uncontrollably. Cold sweat poured down his back. He remembered that account vividly, how he had secretly siphoned money to support his mother's lifestyle, buy her jewelry to flaunt at her social club, and customize his motorcycle. He thought Nora would never find out. He thought she was foolish. He was wrong. Digital trails don't disappear. Mr. Saunders presented highlighted bank statements. Over $32,000 had been taken for expenses completely unrelated to household needs, spent solely on Ryan's and Mrs. Miller's personal indulgences. That amount constituted financial fraud and domestic theft, crimes punishable by years in prison. Mrs. Miller froze. Her face drained to a deathly white. She knew exactly where that money had gone. Much of it now hung from her wrists as gold bracelets, sat in her wardrobe as expensive clothes, and had long since been eaten away in lavish meals. The irony struck like a slap. She had mocked Nora for being poor while living off Nora's stolen money. Nora slowly stood. She looked down at the two people who now resembled defendants awaiting sentencing. She said she didn't need the $32,000 back. To her now, that amount was meaningless compared to her dignity. But she did need justice. She gave Ryan a choice. Return the money immediately, or Mr. Saunders would call the police officers already waiting at the security post outside to file an official report. It was an impossible choice. Ryan had no money. His accounts were empty. His assets were negative. He turned to his mother in desperation, but Mrs. Miller could only shake her head weakly, eyes wide with terror. Her jewelry was fake, already pawned in secret. The money was gone. They were finished. Ryan finally understood he hadn't just lost his chance at wealth. He was standing at the threshold. Ryan's body shook violently as he collapsed back onto the expensive leather sofa. Cold sweat drenched his back, and his face turned deathly pale, as if the blood had drained completely from his veins. With the calm precision of a seasoned legal executioner, Mr. Saunders placed the bank transaction records directly in front of Ryan. His tone was flat, emotionless, yet crushing. Every transaction, he explained, had been meticulously recorded. The savings left by Nora's late father, money that should have served as her emergency fund, had been systematically withdrawn by Ryan throughout their 2-year marriage. Digital records clearly showed the funds flowing into Ryan's personal account. From there, the money was used to pay installments on a car registered under Mrs. Miller's name, purchase gold jewelry, cover Mrs. Miller's swelling credit card bills from luxury shopping sprees, and even treat Ryan's friends, simply to maintain his social image. Mrs. Miller stared at Ryan in disbelief, her eyes bulging as if they might burst from their sockets. She had never imagined that the illusion of luxury she had enjoyed all this time came from the money of the daughter-in-law she constantly mocked as poor and useless. Ryan had lied to her repeatedly, claiming the money came from work bonuses or salary increases. Mrs. Miller felt deceived. Yet, strangely, she did not feel guilty for consuming money that belonged to an orphan. What she felt was sheer terror of poverty and the looming shadow of prison. In her heart, she began blaming Ryan, calling him foolish for getting caught. Nora broke the silence with a firm, unyielding voice. She issued an ultimatum. Ryan had 5 minutes to return the $32,000 immediately, right now, into her account. If the money did not arrive within 5 minutes, Mr. Saunders would submit all evidence directly to the police. Nora emphasized that charges of domestic theft and financial embezzlement carry prison sentences exceeding 4 years. With cutting irony, she asked, "Are you ready to spend your youth rotting in a cold prison cell, eating tasteless food and sleeping shoulder to shoulder with criminals?" At the word prison, Ryan's mental defenses shattered instantly. He slid off the sofa and dropped to his knees on the cold granite floor at Nora's feet. Crocodile tears poured down his face. He sobbed uncontrollably, clinging to her legs, begging for mercy in a hoarse, pitiful voice. The sight was grotesquely ironic compared to his arrogance just an hour ago. Ryan confessed he had no money. His accounts were empty. The $32,000 was gone, evaporated into meaningless status symbols and a hollow lifestyle. Desperate, he began rambling, trying to justify his sins. He claimed he had been forced to steal because Mrs. Miller constantly demanded expensive items so she wouldn't lose face to her neighbors and her social club friends. With a trembling finger, Ryan pointed at his own mother, accusing her of pressuring him to appear wealthy. He claimed he did it to make her happy, so she should share the responsibility. Ryan tried to wash his hands of guilt by throwing blame onto the very woman who gave birth to him. Mrs. Miller exploded. She stood up and kicked Ryan hard in the shoulder, sending him rolling across the floor. She screamed hysterically, cursing him an ungrateful, disobedient son who dared accuse his own mother. A vicious fight erupted between mother and son in front of Nora and Uncle Benjamin. They screamed, blamed, exposed each other's secrets, and attacked like trapped animals. The scene was humiliating, disgusting. The family bond they once boasted about proved as fragile as wet paper when confronted with money and law. Nora watched the spectacle with empty eyes. She felt no pleasure in their collapse, only relief. Relief that she was finally seeing their true faces. She realized then that Uncle Benjamin saving her had been the greatest blessing of her life. Nora signaled Mr. Saunders to stop the disgraceful brawl. Mr. Saunders cleared his throat sharply. His voice echoed through the room, silencing Mrs. Miller as she yanked at Ryan's hair. "The 5 minutes are over," he said calmly. "Since payment has not been made, the law will proceed." He pulled out his phone, clearly preparing to call the police. Ryan collapsed again, kissing the floor, begging Nora for mercy one last time. He promised to do anything, be her servant, her driver, anything to avoid prison. Nora slowly shook her head. "I don't need a servant who is also a thief," she replied coldly. At that moment, Mr. Saunders spoke again. He lowered his phone and said there was one more matter to resolve before the police arrived. The $32,000, he explained, was merely the tip of the iceberg. From his briefcase, he removed the final document, its cover a deep blood red, a color that screamed danger. Mr. Saunders looked at Ryan and Mrs. Miller with an expression that held both pity and disgust. He asked Ryan about the house he and Mrs. Miller were currently living in, the house inherited from Ryan's late father, which Mrs. Miller proudly flaunted as a symbol of their social status. Ryan's face, already pale, turned ashen gray. He froze, lips sealed, eyes filled with a terror far greater than fear of prison. Unaware of the truth, Mrs. Miller arrogantly answered that the house was obviously theirs, a legitimate inheritance where she planned to spend her old age in peace. Mr. Saunders slowly shook his head. He opened the red document and revealed its contents, a copy of the house title, and a loan agreement bearing suffocating interest rates. As Mr. Saunders read aloud, Mrs. Miller felt her world collapse. 6 months ago, long before Nora was thrown out, Ryan had fallen for a fraudulent investment scheme promising instant multiplied returns. Driven by greed and the desire to get rich quickly, Ryan stole the original house certificate from his mother's wardrobe. Without her knowledge, he pawned the only house they owned to a high-level loan shark at an outrageous interest rate. He poured the money into the scam, hoping to double it within a month, redeem the certificate, and pocket the profit. But the investment vanished. The scammers disappeared. The debt, however, continued to grow daily. Ryan couldn't even pay the interest, let alone the principal. He hid the truth, praying for a miracle. What came instead was disaster. After months of default, the loan shark exercised his legal right to seize and auction the collateral. Mrs. Miller screamed hysterically, clutching her chest as if it were being crushed. Her house was her life, her last remaining asset. She attacked Ryan, beating him mercilessly while wailing in grief. She never imagined her beloved son would sell the roof over her head for a reckless gamble. Ryan did not resist. He no longer had the strength. His crime had left them homeless. But the final shock was yet to come. Mr. Saunders raised his hand, signaling silence. He explained that the house had been auctioned last week at a low price, and this is where karma struck with merciless precision. Mr. Saunders pointed towards Uncle Benjamin. Because the house was sold at auction, Uncle Benjamin decided to purchase it. He paid off Ryan's debt in full and reclaimed the title. Legally and absolutely, the rightful owner of the house at this very moment was Uncle Benjamin, and the title had already been transferred into Nora's name. Ryan and Mrs. Miller stared at Nora in disbelief. The house where they had expelled her, the house where they had humiliated her, now belonged to her. The irony cut like a blade through their hearts. Nora looked at them coldly. "You threw me out of my own husband's house because you said I was just a freeloader. Now you're the ones living in my house, and I don't allow strangers to occupy my property." Uncle Benjamin stepped forward. With terrifying authority, he issued his final order. Since the house now belonged to him, Ryan and Mrs. Miller are not permitted to stay there another second. Security teams and moving trucks had already been dispatched. Their belongings were being removed and dumped onto the sidewalk. The locks will be changed immediately. "You are evicted," Uncle Benjamin said firmly. "Leave my house now." Ryan collapsed, crying hysterically, begging not to be thrown out. They had nowhere to go, no money, no relatives willing to help. Uncle Benjamin did not waver. He summoned his security staff. 2 large guards entered and dragged Ryan and Mrs. Miller out of the mansion. Ryan screamed and begged for mercy. Mrs. Miller screamed Nora's name, hoping for compassion. Nora had already turned away. She walked to the large window and watched as they were thrown outside the gate like garbage finally placed where it belonged. At that exact moment, a police patrol car arrived. Mr. Saunders had already